What is experiential learning? I work for an organisation who arguably have been at the forefront of this unique learning methodology for over 40 years now, and perhaps we don't talk about it as much as we should. What makes this style of learning so effective? Who does it work for? Why do our global clients keep choosing to embrace this approach? And is it still relevant in this modern world? A big topic for today's episode of In Good Company, so I'm delighted to be joined by Chiara Fregonese to discuss this today. Chiara is a senior consultant based in Rome and part of our Impact Italia team. So hello, Chiara, or should I say ciao, Chiara? How are you?
Ciao, Dan. I'm good. I'm very good. Thank you. Thank you for having
Well,
me.
it's a delight to have you here, and I genuinely mean that we're very appreciative of you being here to talk to us today about experiential learning. So I'm going to give our listeners and viewers the chance to get to know you a little bit better. We always ask our podcast guests the same question at the beginning, which is to tell us about yourself in 60 seconds.
All right. Let's start hard. Let's start big. Chiara, Roman, Italian, mom since a few months, and also a psychologist as a background, a group analyst in, let's say, in being. I keep on study to do that. And I'm also a researcher for the Italian team. I've been responsible for a series of researches that we've run, and of course, a consultant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you've been working, how long have you worked for Impact now?
It's 13 years
13,
this year.
wow. Yeah, wow. Yeah, it's, so I'm in my 10th year now, and I can't believe how fast it's gone. It's just ridiculous how quickly it's gone. And especially, did you say that you've become a mum very recently?
Yes, in May last year.
Congratulations. Yeah. So you're in the thick of early stages of having a child and working as well. It's a fun time. Let's be honest. So yeah, we're here today to talk about experiential learning. And so let's start big. Well, let's just open that big first question up there. So what is experiential learning?
All right, that's really a big question. And I feel the responsibility to say it right, but I'm going to try. Experiential learning is a family of methods, I would say, that prioritize experience over other ways of teaching and learning. And in particular, it prioritizes the reflection of experience as something that can do justice to the complexity of reality, of organizational realities, to the fact that sometimes the unexpected is just behind the corner, and we have to find ways in the moment to act and try and do the best thing, or the thing that is good enough for us to achieve our goals. So it's something that really puts experience at the center of the flow, and of course, it is also accompanied by other components. But first of all, really is what can be learned by acting in first person, firsthand.
I think what I've come to connect to experiential learning more of recent, and you'll probably be able to agree with this, in the sense that the way I've resonated with experiential learning, that learning by doing, has just hit home more recently in the past few years since becoming a parent as well. That because we learn experientially from an extremely young age, and we continue to do so. And I think what's been interesting is the way that we then Impact have then used that as a way of continuing learning in more developed years. So it's what difference, I suppose, is how do we describe our experiential learning model to people who've maybe detached from it, or maybe expect a certain way of learning in organizations, for example. Perhaps, and we've got a model about this. Perhaps you could explain about our experiential learning model to go alongside it.
Yes. So more in general, we can, you said right, all animals share this function of learning by experience. Now, the point is that often this function is automatic. It's not something intentional. It's made for evolutionary reasons, so has its own reasons to exist. when we use experiential learning, we intentionally leverage this capacity of living beings to adjust according to what's happening in the context. That means, for instance, that you might have an experience which needs to be complex, needs to be a bit unexpected, needs to have some surprise element within it, and you have to go through it. You have to get confused, feel the mess, get frustrated, and try to imagine ways in which you could overcome whatever obstacle or challenge that you encounter through that experience. And by reflecting on it and by speaking, having dialogues around that, listening to others, and sometimes also getting to know what others have been doing in the past. Through that process, you can try to incorporate that sort of multiple knowledge into something that we call learning. Now, in the past, in other realities, there is always the mention to the Kolb cycle, where you've got experience, reflection, conceptualization, and planning of action. Oh, this is a cycle. It's very I would say linear, and you do it and redo it and redo it again. What makes impact model original in its and I think more realistic is that you have experience, you have the encounter with the complexity of the world. Can be because we are proposing participants to achieve a goal in an experiential project that is a metaphor of something that might happen in their organizational lives, or it might be something more complex, like living really an experience in their organizational context. So having a conversation with someone, exploring a specific topic in real time. But what I think helps us with our method is that there is no fixed linearity, no fixed cycle. So, of course, after the experience, a good practice is to reflect on that, because reflection is what makes experience really, I would say, capable to be elaborated, capable to what makes us capable to extract what is useful even for the future. So the reflection bit is always accompanying the experience. And let's keep in mind that the reflection bit is seldom something that you can do alone. You need a group, you need others, you need other perspectives to do that, to enrich that experience with some thought. So it's thinking in action. But of course, then you can you can learn from knowledge, the so-called well-established knowledge that you learn from books. And also you can practice new skills. You can rehearse something to make you master it. But there is a combination of these ingredients that is way more flexible than in what we call the Kolb cycle. And that can make a lot of different experiences valuable and worth to be rethought and to become sources of great learnings. It could be really, really everything. And in some cases, we also prefer that it's something not necessarily metaphorical, but something that is happening to people in their lives and is somehow keeping them awake at night. So it's something that is real.
Yeah, I really sort of like what you said there. And I was trying to, obviously, I suppose for me, it's quite easy to hear what you've said and apply it to knowledge of work that we've done with clients over the years, and whether I've seen it firsthand or not, or, and it's one of those things that it's once you've experienced it yourself, if you've maybe been on an impact program, or if you've been immersed in an experiential learning, for lack of a better word, experience, it's hard to get until you've been through it yourself. And I was maybe a nice supplementary question would be to kind of what does an impact experiential program look like in a nutshell to you? What would if from the start of the process through to not even the end really, but talk us through what an experiential program looks like.
Well, I would say that it might start with something that disrupts a bit whatever equilibrium is in the room in that moment, either if it is a face-to-face program or if it is a virtual program. So it starts with making you embrace something unexpected from the very start, from the very beginning, where you would expect good manners to introduce everybody very gently, maybe. Instead, you did dive into the experience. And because of the novelty of such a situation, you have the opportunity really to observe yourself and reflect on how you react in conditions in which you are caught by surprise. So this is something I would say. Do not expect the expected. And then you should expect different opportunities and different types of experiences. Might be something more metaphorical that makes you leave a communication or an information asymmetry or an uneven distribution of power or tough decisions to be taken together. All these types of dynamics can be replicated in metaphor in what we call experiential projects that somehow create that necessary frustration that enable an extra click in your thought. There is an author that I really love that is called Wilfred Bion, an English author, that used to say that thought comes from frustration. So if you're not frustrated, you don't have the necessity to think. And so we create these sort of experiences in which you get that little shiver of doubt, of fear, frustration. And then you can reflect on that and have a dialogue around that and learn from that. But apart from the metaphor, you can also, for instance, lean into the reality and the experiences of someone else, like it happens in our in-market journey. So you can inquire and really listen to the experience of others, other clients, other realities, and learn from the carrier's experience of someone else. So you learn by observing and try to get into the shoes of someone else, or you just bring your own experience and you work through peer consulting, and you bring your case to the table and you observe others putting their hands on it and see how it flows and how they would solve it. And this is, again, another great opportunity to enable the capacity to change perspective and enable what we call flexibility. That is one of the reasons why we use experience, because it encompasses all the complexity of reality.
One of the things that we often compare experiential learning to, the alternative being like what we would traditionally refer to as classroom-based learning, which of course nowadays is a lot more commonly accessed as virtual learning online, where you might do a training module or something. But one of the things I find particularly powerful about experiential learning is that individuals can end up finding themselves going through what we would refer to as a pivotal moment. They might have one moment within an experiential program that they might just not get through a formal like online training or classroom-based training. So it's very easy to see kind of the benefits to an individual, I would say. But how would you say, how does it work for organizations? How can experiential learning be used to enable change within an organization?
Well, consider that if we step out of the training room, okay, so of programs in which there is a proper training, which still can be a great support for change processes, of course, for project teams, for instance. But if you step out of the metaphor and you enter into the complexity of leading change that often can be planned, but then reality kicks in and you've got a series of accidents that create that messiness, that frustration, that level of emotional activation that sometimes disable our full capacity to take good decision and learn from experience. So you take all these opportunities that happen very often when you are trying to lead a transformation. So it might be that you want to review a pilot initiative that you started, and you end up with a group who leads that sort of initiative to review all those moments, to exchange some feedback about how they're working together and they're leading this initiative through. Or you collect feedback from others. So you somehow review the experience, the real experience that groups, that people are having during the change process. And you make it become object of observation and learning. This is how we operate when we enable and help and support organizations to lead transitions. We use experiential approach, I would say, that also includes the capacity to welcome new points of view, listen to others, think about all the stakeholder engagement and involvement and the impacts it has on change processes, and somehow make you review what you're currently doing and also make you try new things, liberate new ideas. And it can be done at different levels. It can be done with large groups of people, can be done with project groups, small restricted groups of people managing the transitions. And can be done at different levels, but always keeping in mind that is the experience per se that can be reviewed and used as an opportunity for learning.
Yeah, there was loads to take away from there. I think what that shared experience is a massive thing. I was reflecting when you were just talking then about we ran an exec retreat a couple of weeks ago at the time of recording this, and there was an accidental experiential moment for this team of people, largely strangers, that were coming together for this mini experiential program. And there was a terrible storm on the way to get here. And we'd set up a group where they could communicate with each other prior to the event. And so they started leaning in and helping each other, and they were going through this thing together. So instantly, before they'd even started the program, this group was gelled. And it just by going through that one experience together meant that they were all like a level playing field. They were all working together to get through a particular thing. And I think that was what, so it was just accidentally they'd ended up, it was a 2-day program rather than a 1-day program just because of the weather on one particular day. So it's really interesting to see how just by going through that. And the other part of it that I took away from it is that with experiential learning, it can be so memorable that it can allow you to come away with a completely unique, a very personal experience, but also it's a shared experience with a wider group usually. And I was curious also because I understand that you've been instrumental in Impact Italia's research into multi-generational learning. And I was curious, does experiential learning work for all ages and generations? Are there particular groups where it works better or more effectively? What have you found in your research?
Well, I would respond in this way. I think the experiential learning works very well across generations. So not for one target or another, but really when we are able to create and provide an experience to groups of people of different generations that can bring to the table a lot of different skills, points of view, and solutions. And the project, the activity, the task that they're asked to do become the experience through which not only they achieve a goal, but also they bridge gaps, they sort of reconnect. Because sometimes, especially with this topic of generations, the thing we found is that people, spend a lot of time complaining about each other, not exploring each other. And the reality is that when you really listen to the natural language of people that are asked, what energizes you at work, what makes you satisfied at work, the needs that these people of all different generations, we might want to call them, the needs that they express are very similar. And another thing that we found is that the typical labels, Gen Z, Boomer, Gen X, do not necessarily represent a reality. Of course, you've got age that is a factor. We get older, we get more and more experience and more learning, but not necessarily that needs to play a fundamental role and needs to separate us. So experiential learning works a lot when you put different people on a similar task. It could be an innovation task together to find out new solutions, because that is really where I think most of the intuitions and ideas can flourish.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you there, because one thing I've been thinking a lot about recently is that there's particularly with big, global problems, and this isn't necessarily within organizations specifically, but take climate change, for example. There was, you've got young people, largely young people, that are extremely passionate about making change happen, but without necessarily having the same level of experience, life experience, let's call it, that other generations could provide. And so to get that, if there's an opportunity to get that diversity of thought between age ranges in one room, then it's only got to lead to surely the better, provided everybody's willing to kind of embrace everybody's thoughts and take everything on board. Both ways. Otherwise, if you end up with clashes, it just won't work. So there's got to be that level of openness. But so it was just what got me thinking about that as a sort of a real world example where that can be a major benefit of getting the both passion and things and drive from a younger age to maybe the experience and knowledge from an older age. So that's really interesting. I suppose historically, I was also thinking about, and Impact sort of grew out of using the outdoors and adventure for putting people in direct experiences, and use and sort of generating experiential learning programs in the outdoors. But with, of course, younger people spending a lot more time online, and with COVID and putting us all and with us now working more hybrid, how can experiential learning work in that realm? How can it work in a hybrid situation, in a virtual situation? How does that work?
Well, I think we can speak for our shared company that Impact has been pioneering the exploration of experiential learning online way before that COVID came in. So in a way that put us in a good position, because we felt somehow equipped to see how to bring people together, also to review what was happening in that moment. A lot of the experiences that we had during the COVID time were really to review the massiveness from an emotional point of view and a cognitive point of view of that experience for, I would say, the human population, but of course also for the organizations and for the groups and for the individuals in that moment. So we could benefit of our attitude to be a bit adventurous and try to put people in conditions that made them step out of their usual comfort shoes and try to be engaged in either problems they have never had before, or in settings that they were not used to be in. So in those moments, I really felt the power of being okay with people just having an experience of something that they were not familiar of, and observing them find out ways to make it work for them, to find a solution to a challenge, and guide them and through reflecting and also giving them some hints, but and practicing their skills in this setting. But I really feel that the attitude that you need to have as a facilitator to welcome that uncertainty is the same that you ask to your participants. And when it happens in the hybrid world, where you have less capacity to control, I think it's a bit is powered in a way from a facilitator point of view. No, so you really need to be open to that uncertainty that might come along. But let's also be frank. When we surprise participants with some experiential activities in our virtual programs that they're not expecting at all, that becomes really funny for people. That becomes amusing. And let's not forget that the pleasure part, the discovery part, is one of the elements that make an experience memorable. And once you cope with something that was feeling thrilling at the moment, that sticks into your memory and into your luggage of knowledge.
Absolutely. As you were talking there, I was thinking of a virtual program that we were running during kind of one of the heights of COVID, that we essentially translated, I guess, what we would do as a face-to-face project, and turned it into a virtual project. So we were having participants, and it sounds like a bit of a game, a bit of a joke, but it really does work, because we had participants where we'd normally ask them to go. It would have an allotted time limit where they would have to go and photograph specific things within a place that they would be. So obviously at the peak of COVID, everybody was at home, so they would be challenged to drink a glass of water whilst bouncing a ball on a tennis racket. That would be one, and it would all get them a certain amount of points that we'd have to at the end of the thing. It would all be totted up, and so it became a bit of it. There was that competitive nature whilst also being fun. But some of this was largely, it was, they would record these videos and I would edit them together and put them in a montage to play back to these groups. And some of the stuff was so creative, so funny, so fun, and so memorable, as you've said. And to have that as part of what could be quite a fatiguing Zoom experience or whatever during a day, just breaks up that day and makes the whole program powerful. You can learn from it and reflect on it, of course, as well. It was just, there were lots of powerful moments that I've seen and I'm very privileged to have seen over my time here. My next question is about, I suppose, a bit of advice. So you're one of our senior consultants and you help people every day to develop new behaviors. What piece of advice or top tip would you give to people managers, leaders out there who are trying to help individuals within their teams with their personal development?
Well, I'd say that a good thing would be to be curious about them and be ready to explore them as if they didn't know them or haven't known them for years. Really to be capable to step into their point of view and see what a day feels like for them, what a task feels like for them, what that new exciting project feels like for them. Because this not only makes you more empathetic and close to them, but also will somehow train your flexibility of thought, your capacity to have that perspective taking thing that will make you then, as a byproduct, also have new information by chance, but really to live through the eyes of someone else for a specific moment in time, not stepping out of your role, but that really enables that flexibility that is not just a cognitive flexibility, but is also an emotional flexibility that makes you have a more comprehensive view of the reality that you have within your team. This is what I would say: be curious and really inquire with the aim to discover something that you're not expecting.
Yeah, it's a great piece of advice, and one that resonates with me particularly, of course, because, well, asking questions is now one of my full-time jobs. Yeah, asking and being curious is definitely a way that particularly that I learn from. Having those conversations is, and that storytelling element as well is super powerful, isn't it? I'm going to ask you a bit more of a personal question now. We've talked a lot about learning experiences and how others can have pivotal moments and learning experience. But what would you say throughout your career or life, I suppose, is one of your most powerful learning experiences?
Well, I would say maternity. Being a parent
Yeah,
is a fantastic.
yeah, I'm with you there, and it doesn't stop either. Yeah, that is absolutely true. It's certainly a big learning curve.
Because it teaches you a series of things like that feedback is key, that if the other is not understanding, somehow you might be the cause of that, and you have to be creative and invent new things. So that gives you a lot of teaching. But if I go back to the professional career, I think that one of the most memorable experience was when one of my first experiences in which I was just observing a team of colleagues. I had just arrived, and I had this international group of colleagues, somewhere from the UK, somewhere from Italy, somewhere from other countries, all together united to run this program, and to see them bringing all the different knowledge and backgrounds and exchanging and leading that group of participants that in that case were particularly challenging was really, really thrilling for me, because I was constantly asking myself, what would I do if I were in them? And a lot of the times I had no reply at all. And to see them cope with this was really inspirational for me, gave me a lot of hope, gave me a lot of thrill. And so that stays as a memorable experience.
Yeah, it's and again that piece of experiential learning. You grasp onto those things, and they carry with you, don't they, throughout the rest of your career, the rest of your life. They retain with you. That's a nice moment of reflection there. I do have one last question for you, which is along similar lines, I suppose. Which is, and we've been asking this to all of our guests on this podcast, which is, if you were starting your career again, what would be the best piece of advice that you would give your younger self?
All right, this is hard. I I don't know. First, this is my real question. I don't know. The second question, though, if I have to build on that and try to go through the solution, is to be a bit daring and courageous. Because whenever I felt that I needed courage to speak up, to show up, to imagine, to go a little bit further, that meant that in those moments I was learning the most, because I was crossing a boundary. So the daring side of thing, of being a new starter in an organization, for instance, is something that I would recommend there.
Yeah, it's a good piece of advice, and it's at this point where I normally challenge our guests and just say, do you think you're still living by that advice?
In part.
In part, yeah. when you're not trying to get a few minutes sleep. Yeah, no, I understand. Well, Chiara, that has brought us to all of my questions. That's all of them for today, or at least all the ones I had written down. I could ask you loads more, of course, but we haven't got time, sadly. So thank you again for taking time out of your day to spend some time with us for that conversation. I really appreciate it. And that just leaves me to say that if you'd like to find out any more about Impact or our experiential learning methodology, then please find all of the links to everything that you need in the description of wherever you found this episode today. So one final thanks to Chiara for joining me today.
Thank you, Dan.
And until the next time, take care.
Hey.